All right, sir. We are recording. I do appreciate you joining me here for the first episode of Between the Levees, a new podcast with a focus on the marine industry. First of all, please tell all the listeners who you are.
Well, I'm Frank Morton. I'm semi-retired and out of the barge and towing industry.
Well, let's start from the very beginning. I assume at some point you were born to two parents. Take us back to that point.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm originally from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I grew up over here. And when I was 14, I went to the seminary at a Benedictine monastery and stayed there for high school and beginning of college. And then I decided I discerned that vocation to the priesthood was not in my best interest or God's best interest.
Sure.
So I know I went to the University of Southern Mississippi and met my wife there. And I had decked on charter boats and on towboats when I wasn't going to college to make a little money, and got out of college. And I was working in selling lubricants, and I didn't really care for the work and wasn't happy with it. My wife asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I really always enjoyed the barge and towing industry. So I had a friend that worked in it. His name was Ed Larndine. He worked for Ratcliffe Materials in those days. He recently retired from Cooper T. Smith. Ed told me to put a job wanted ad in the Waterways Journal and run it for 3 weeks and see what happened. And that's what I did. So I wound up getting 3 job offers and took the job in Minneapolis, St. Paul, because it was the farthest away from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We figured we were going to get away, we'd get away, which is really good. I mean, I went up there and I got there in the spring of 1972. And in the summer of 1972 was when Cargill did the first Russian grain deal, and things went nuts up there. I worked a lot, 7 days a week and on call at night. But we were up there by ourselves. It was the best thing that ever happened to our marriage. We just had one another to cling to, and it really strengthened our relationship, and not having family in the way. Not that family ever means to get in the way, but just
Sure.
you get plugged into things sometime. And
Right.
that was not a distraction for us. So it worked out very well. And I liked it. And I done a lot of work with American Commercial Barge Line. I'd gone into, after the end of the navigation season, I went into business with 2 other guys, and we bought a towboat. And we had an agreement to work the boat at Red Wing, Minnesota with Central Soya. And the other 2 guys didn't want to do that. They wanted to leave the boat on the Illinois River. And I told Central Soya we would do this. And so I told them they needed to buy me out because I wasn't going to be in business with 2 guys who made an agreement and then walked away from it.
Sure.
And so that's what happened. And
Allow,
pardon?
allow me to pause you right there.
Okay.
I'd like to cover all of that in this conversation. Can you tell me what did your parents do for a living?
Oh, my father was a letter carrier.
Okay.
And my mother was a home housewife. They had 8 kids. My mother was blind in an accident in 1949, and she only saw 4 of her 8 children. I'm the third oldest, the second boy, and my mother thought that raising her children, she came from a family of 9, and she thought that was her greatest vocation, and that's what she spent her time at. And my father was very active in the community and in sports. He coached, football when we were little, and he umpired in baseball and was very active with the Gulfport Recreational Department, and was a hunter and a fisherman, and he taught all of us kids how to hunt and fish and all of that. I think that me leaving home at the age of 14, I just turned 14 a couple of weeks before I left, and I think it was harder on my parents than it was on me. It was a new adventure as far as I was concerned, and
I apologize. Where was it that you went at 14?
I went to St. Joseph's Seminary at St. Benedict, Louisiana, which is just outside of Covington. There's a Benedictine monastery called St. Joseph Abbey.
I think I've actually performed there in college in the choir.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Did you
sir.
go to school there?
Southeastern.
Oh, you went to Southeastern. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they have a good relationship, or had a good. I still think they do. Some of their choir directors have come from Southeastern. And anyway, it was a working farm when I was there. We had a bunch of dairy cows and orchards and all kinds of apiaries and chickens and tappery where they kept hogs and pigs and all of that. So I always told my family I ate so much better in the seminary than I did at home, because we were trying to cut corners all the time. We used to use, my mother would take powdered milk and then cut it with regular milk so it was more palatable. But we would just come into breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and there'd be this huge pitcher, probably a gallon and a half of just fresh milk sitting on the tables. And they had a bakery, baked their own bread and all that. I said, I put on a lot of weight at St. Ben.
Did that gallon and a half of milk serve all 8 children?
No. That was at the seminary.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't. It was probably, well, there's a 17-year spread between the oldest and the youngest.
Okay.
So, by the time the youngest was up to where they were drinking milk out of a glass, my oldest sister was already in college, and of course I was gone. And when I left home, there were only 7. And then that spring, when I was home for spring vacation, my youngest sister was born.
Are you all so close?
Yeah. One of the reasons Jenny and I now live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We moved back over here because my 4 sisters live here.
Okay.
And a lot of my nieces and nephews. I have 2 brothers that live in Baton Rouge and one that lives in LaPlace.
I know one of them.
They're over there a good bit. Pardon?
I said I know one of them.
Oh yeah, one in LaPlace. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So
he went to the seminary too.
Did he?
He followed years after me. I think he entered, I believe, in the 2nd year of college and stayed 2 years.
Okay.
And he went.
What was that experience for a 14-year-old moving to a working farm?
Well, we were in class a lot. We went to school 6 days a week, and the attitude of the Benedictine approach to life is that by participating in productive work, you participated in the creative work of God. So the Benedictine motto is peace, with St. Benedict raising his hand like this. And the motto is work and pray. Ora et labora. You hold on, I'm going to show you a poster from their centennial year that shows the Ora et labora. Can you see that?
I can. Yes, sir.
All right. Work, pray, and work. Now, ora and labora are verbs, and they are the imperative form of the verbs. They're not to work and to pray. They are a command. Work and pray, or pray and work. So So the communal prayer that they do together, the divine office, vespers and lauds and matins and all that stuff, and the community mass when they come together, they call that the work of God. And then the rest of the time, they're doing the work of the monastery, the work
Okay.
of the community to better the community. So we were honored, we were privileged one afternoon a week to work for the betterment of the community. So we would go and do manual labor. We would dig ditches. I mean, it wasn't really hard work or anything like that, but it was to get you an appreciation. And so one of the things that some people don't understand is that when you would get punished, you were not allowed to do productive work, because productive work, you participate in the creative activity of God, and for disobedience, you're not to be honored. You're to be to learn a lesson, not to waste your time and not to waste the time of everyone else. The God gives all of us a limited amount of time. So we have some things that we would do is we would be told you have an hour that you have to go to this classroom and write, and there would be a monk there, and they would say, take out this particular book and starting at the end of it, write it backwards. And you'd write for an hour. And then you'd bring all the papers up to them. They'd look at them, they'd tear them up, throw them in the garbage can to show you how. Anyway, the other thing was the thing that a lot of people get a big kick out of is we had a flatbed trailer, and they had a big old pile of dirt. And
Okay.
the dirt was at one end of the pasture, and we would go out and shovel the dirt and put it on the flatbed truck, drive over to the other end of the pasture and shovel it off and make a pile there. Then the next time somebody had detention, as we call that, they had to go and load it back onto the trailer and take it back to the other place and unload it again. So it
That
was,
sound that does sound to some degree like military training I've heard of with my brother and my stepfather.
yeah, well, it's just a point that we're trying to make. Now, the Benedictines have been around since St. Benedict was born in 480, and it's generally conceded that he wrote the Rule of Benedict in about 512 to 516. So it's been around a while. I think it's one of these time-tested things.
Sure.
Seems to work. Yeah.
All right. So you were there until you were 18, I assume?
19.
19.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you go straight into college or university with
Yeah.
them?
So it was at that time, it was a 4-year high school and 2 years of college. Then you went to the theology school, and you had your last 2 years of regular college were pre-theology, and then you studied theology. So after I was in seminary for about 3 years, the Catholic Church decided that it wasn't good having high school students and college students together. So they had Catholic seminaries that were just high schools, usually local things where the students lived at home. And then you would go to a seminary college and be with college age students and get your undergraduate degree. And in the process of that, take your pre-theology. And then for the last 4 years, you would go to a theology school. So the concept was it was 12 years educational process of discernment from the age of 14 basically to the age of 26. And they called it discernment. You were always told that God has called you, but he may have called you just to come here and experience some of this, and maybe not to be a priest. You're supposed to try to discern what the call is. That's a difficult thing to do.
Sure.
And one of the things that really concerned me that I thought I'd have a great deal of difficulty with is that I was studying to be a parish priest and not a monk, a member of a community where you have support. But parish priests often live alone or maybe with one other priest. And usually, if it's with one other priest, it's a senior priest with a younger priest. They don't have necessarily a lot in common, but the older priest is supposed to be mentoring the younger priest, helping them along. And it's often a very lonely life. And I think I was intimidated by that to a great extent. I didn't really think that I could bear fruit for everyone in that type of a lifestyle. I thought the loneliness would just get to me too much.
Hmm. So that would lead me then
Pardon?
to your eventual departure from the monastery, or excuse me, seminary.
Yeah.
Um, what was that process? What was leaving the place, and where did you go?
Well, I had a spiritual director, and I went and I talked with him, and I told him what I was going through and all that. And, he tried to give me some guidance. And then the Holy Week before Easter, we went on a 3-day retreat, and he had suggested that I, try to come to a decision about my discernment during that retreat. And at the end of the retreat, when it was all over the next week, I told him that I'd come to the decision that, I needed to go elsewhere. And so I finished out the semester. I mean, they were very gracious. My the monk who was over the college section, the 2-year college section at that time, later, now it's a 4-year college section. He came and got me out of study hall one evening shortly after I had talked to my spiritual director about this. And of course, the faculty and the monks, they kind of knew what was going on, because the whole idea here is to help one another. So Father Jerome came and he tapped me on the shoulder in study hall and said, "Come walk with me." So I went out, and in front of the monastic building, there's a huge triangle where traffic comes in and flows around, and parking area and all that. And he said, "Let's walk around the triangle." So we walked around the triangle, and he talked to me, and he basically said, don't be too hard on yourself. This is what you always wanted to do. You decided this is not for you. Don't be so hard on yourself. And when you succeed, realize that you succeed and accept it. Because a lot of people who give up on a dream they have when they're young, they feel like the rest of their life, all they do is go from one failure to another. And you look upon this as a failure. It's not really a failure. It's a success because you came to the right decision. And that's the way you have to look at it. And I just thought, and that was the attitude I got from all the monks and from my fellow seminarians as they found out about it. And I found that very supportive. I mean, it wasn't, well, you're a quitter, and it wasn't, thank God you're leaving, or anything like that. It was just this wishing wishing me to understand that I had made the best decision that I could make, and everything going forward would be that I would get the best out of life.
Sure.
So I'm still very close to the Abbey. I'm an oblate at the monastery, and I'm the chairman of the physical plant committee of the monastery and seminary college. I've been alumnus of the year. I served every position you can serve on the Alumni Association. I started the Alumni Development Fund, where every year we have a fundraising thing, a phone-a-thon, what we call alumni, and ask them to contribute for a particular goal. And it's been very rewarding. I'm still very close with all those guys over there. And last year, Father Lawrence Phelps passed away. He was 94, and he was the last living monk who had taught me when I was in the seminary.
Okay.
And I was talking to Abbot Justin, and I said, he was the last living monk that taught me when I was in seminary. And he said, "Well, Frankie, I hate to tell you this, but you know who the senior monk is now?" And I said, "No, who's the senior monk?" He said, Father Peter. Father Peter was Ned Hammett. He's 3 years older than me. So the senior monk in the monastery is only 3 years older than me. I said, "Damn, I feel old."
Right. Well, it's better than the alternative, but
Yes, it is.
so where did you what was the next step for you when you departed the seminary?
Well, I went to junior college for one semester, and then I had a friend of mine that father owned a charter boat, and he had to reposition the boat as the fish were moving around and all that. So I decked with him while he was doing all of that. And then he asked me to stay and work for a while as a deckhand, and I did that. And I learned a lot. I learned how to cut open a flying fish and put the leader in there with the big hook in it, and then sew him back up again. So when he skimmed across the top of the water, it didn't look like he was dead. It took me a while to perfect that. I probably destroyed 200 or 300 flying fish before I finally got it right, but learned how to do that. And I must say, that's a talent that I learned that I've never used anywhere else in my life.
Right. Understood.
Right. So anyway, I did that. Then I went back and I went to college. And when I was taking breaks and things like that, I would work on with marine construction outfits. And one of them, they all had little towboats, and one of them had two little towboats.
This was the
Pardon?
junior college years, or
No, this is. Well, when I was in the seminary, Tim, we went to school 6 days a week, and we
right.
were in college school 6 days a week. Now,
Okay.
Saturday was only a half day, but we carried 26 semester hours. So when I finished my freshman year, I had 52 semester hours, but
Okay.
4 hours of the minor profits doesn't really transfer into anything at a secular university that you
Right.
can use for a degree. So, I came out of St. Ben with all these hours, and then one semester, and I was used to carrying, a lot of hours. So I thought these people who were carrying 9 and 12 hours were idiots. I was carrying 18 hours, 18 semester hours, and worked on the side, automobile dealership. But anyway, so I had so many hours when I couldn't really take any more at a junior college level, because you could only transfer a maximum, I believe it was 66 semester hours is the most that you can transfer to a college. And I had Franconian Greek, which is what the Greek in which the Old Testament was the New Testament was written,
Okay.
except for the Hebrews, because a lot of people call it mercantile Greek. It was the Greek of the trade people, as opposed to Hellenistic Greek, but the proper name for it is Franconian. And it was hard to get that to transfer, so I had been taking Latin since I was in the 9th grade. So I went to the University of Southern Mississippi, and I went to the head of the foreign language department, and I said, I want to get these foreign languages in here, and I don't know how to do all this. And I had 4 years of Latin in high school, and I had Latin in college. And she said, "What was your textbook?" And I said, "Bradley's Arnold, Latin English composition workbook." She said, "I had that in graduate school. If you can go back to the seminary and get a copy of their catalog and a copy of the textbook and bring it back to me, I'll give you a credit for 200-300 level courses.
Okay.
And you won't have to take any more, and you'll get your BA, and your language requirements are fulfilled and all of that." So I went around and I got talked to people. People are very helpful. If you go and you ask them and tell them what you're trying to accomplish, they will try to work with you. And that was the experience that I had then. And so I went to school, but I was paying my own way. I went to school for USM was on a quarter system back then. So I went a quarter, and then I would drop out, make some money, and then go another quarter, and then
Okay.
drop out. And so I did that. And the summer of '69, I met my wife and went back to finish up.
What was she also at USM?
Yeah, she was at USM also.
Okay.
She's 2 years younger than I am.
What
But I had been
What did she
Yeah,
study?
I've been playing. Pardon?
What did she study?
Elementary education. She was a
Okay.
teacher,
Okay.
taught for many years. But anyway, when I first left the seminary, the first thing that happened is I got classified from 4D divinity student to 1A, and I called up for my physical. But I'd gotten my left hand caught in a lawnmower when I was a child, and I lost part of my left thumb. I didn't happen when I was 3 years old, so I didn't think it was I've lived with it all my life, never considered it an infirmity. But the Army told me that I was handicapped and I couldn't serve.
Okay.
They made me 1Y, which I thought was a mistake, but I wasn't worried about the draft after that because, when you get to 1Y, they're calling up the Quakers too. So I figured it's going to be a while before that happened.
Yes, sir.
So I didn't have the draft hanging over my head like some of the people did. So we went back to college that fall of '69, and then in the winter quarter of '69, '70, I got a really bad case of the flu and lost. I was in the infirmary for 2 weeks, and I was at that point in time I was into my major, which was political science and philosophy, at a double major, and I didn't want to have bad grades, and I didn't know I could get back to the level I wanted to be. So I went and talked to my faculty advisors, and they suggested that I withdraw while passing. So I withdrew and went back to the coast, but the coast had been demolished by Camille, so there was plenty of work available. And so I worked on the coast, and Jenny would come down on the weekends, and I'd go up every now and then to see her. But
What were you doing?
So
What were you doing for work on the coast?
cleaning up houses, repairing doors and windows, and shoring up floors. It was just labor,
Okay.
construction labor, things like
Gotcha.
that. Yeah, that was all. So anyway, then I came back, and then we got engaged that summer, and then I finished my coursework in the fall of 1970, but Jenny still had to do student teaching, and I didn't. So I walked with her, graduated with her in the spring of '72, 71. I'm sorry, so it's spring of '71, and we got married in November of '70. So we've been married this month. We're married 53 years.
Good for you.
52 years.
I apologize. You're with your wife, and you're in the process of finishing college, is where I think we left off.
Right. Yes. And we finished. I finished college, and we moved down to the Gulf Coast.
Okay. And what did you go? What work did you go into at that point?
So my grandfather had a service station, and he was a jobber for a dealer. For Pennzoil and Quaker State.
Okay.
And we sold Pennzoil and Quaker State lubricants to automobile dealerships and to stores and things like that. And that's basically what I did. I kept those accounts up and did sales calls on them, did deliveries for them, and all of that stuff.
And that was your father's business, you said?
Step-grandfather's business.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did that last? Was that your first, I guess, sort of sales role?
Yeah.
How was it learning that on the fly?
Oh, it wasn't bad. I mean, a lot of these people, my step-grandfather been on the coast for a very long time. He was born on the coast in 1905, and he knew everybody just about. And a lot of these accounts were already established. Basically, the new accounts that I worked on were either people that approached us or new businesses that were opening.
Okay.
And I did, I'd say I was doing sales work, but it's more like customer service work. You
Sure.
go, and these people, It's like being a deckhand on a towboat, you know. It's Monday morning, you got to make the grocery order, and the thing says, how many cans of green beans do you have? If you have less than 3, then order it. If you have
Right.
more than 3 or more, don't order it. And
Right.
it was kind of like that. You know, you'd go into a store and you'd see you'd have a sheet that told you what they typically had, and you would count. And then you would say, you know, you're down to a case of this oil. And they'd say, okay, give me another case or a case and a half or whatever. We had a particular oil that was made by, it's the West Memphis Refining Company in West Memphis, Arkansas. It's called Rebel. It was a non-detergent 30-weight oil. It sold for like 20 cents a quart. That was, and when you got out to the little country stores where these people had automobiles that were really, some of them, you know, they'd go into the service station and say, fill it up with oil and check the gas, because they were just oil burners. And that was really, really popular when you got out into the rural areas. You would sell a lot of that.
Yeah, I think when I worked in oil and gas distribution in trucking, I think the six quart boxes of Mobile One were like $26. So
Yeah.
that's what, $4 a quart in, what year was that, you said?
72,
So
71.
40 years at what, 6 times as much, 6 times as expensive. But anyway, so you did that for how long?
I did that until I started work at Minnesota Harbor Service on May the 4th, 1972. I had I put my ad in I told my step grandfather that, you know, we're going to do something else, and so he continued to work me until I found a job, and then I moved up to St. Paul, and then Jenny stayed and finished teaching. She was teaching second grade. She finished her school year out, and then she moved up there with me.
Okay.
Yes, I started on May the 4th. She got up there about the 6th or 7th of June.
Okay. How was that month of freedom?
But it wasn't a month of freedom. I was drinking from a fire hose, man. You know, the navigation season had been closed for the winter. It had opened up, and at the beginning of May, spring is breaking out all over in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and it did. I mean, it's in a week. Everything turned from gray and brown and black to green.
Sure.
And just took off. And we had a bunch of boats we were running, and I wasn't familiar with the harbor. And we had so below Minneapolis, St. Paul at Hastings, you got Lock and Dam 2. And Lock and Dam 1 is right there by the Ford Motor Company plant, right by where the Minnehaha Falls are. But that's not on the Mississippi. That's in a park adjacent to it. So Lock and Dam 1 is also called the Ford Dam, because the dam was built by Ford Motor Company, and it was a hydroelectric dam. It didn't produce a lot of hydropower. It was strictly for the plant. And of course, during the winter, the river would freeze, and it didn't produce any at all. But they had some there. And then above Lock and Dam 1, you had the Falls of St. Anthony, which is why Minneapolis is built where it was. They used the power from the waterfalls to turn the grinders and for wheat and all of that stuff. But the Falls of St. Anthony are two-step falls. So you had a lower lock called St. Anthony Lower that locked you up to where the flat area was between the falls. Then you went up to Upper St. Anthony, and then that locked you up. And you got up on the other side, the navigation channel probably went for maybe 12, 15 miles. Then there was a railroad bridge across there that you couldn't get under, even with a retractable. And that was the de facto head of navigation of the Mississippi River. They built it where they built it because they built a railroad bridge where they built it because there was a power plant there. NSP Riverside. It was called Northern States Power Riverside. And it took rail shipments of coal during the winter, and it took barge shipments of coal during the late spring, summer, and early fall.
Okay.
So they would get a combination. They were blending coal from Powder River Basin area and all that, which is low BTU coal with more southern Illinois and southern Indiana coal, which is higher BTU.
Okay. And what developed out of that job, I guess, aside from the relationship?
Well, I learned a lot because we loaded a lot of barges once the Russian grain deal had come about, and I got to know a lot of people, and there were opportunities all over the place. And the company was owned by a gentleman named Frank Eipel out of Stillwater, Minnesota, and he had a barge line called Eipel Towing, and we were managing HTBL's fleet, and we had some other fleets up there, and people were wanting us to build tow for them. They wanted to drop their tow and have us break it up and strip it, but we didn't have enough horsepower to do that.
How many boats did you have?
We had 5, I believe.
And what size were they?
The biggest one was the Cayuga. It was 2,400.
Okay.
But most of them, the Tom Thumb was 400.
Okay.
As you expect. The rest of them were 800 to 1,000 horsepower. And we serviced up the Minnesota River all the way to Savage, where the big grain elevators are there. And at that time, Peavy had a grain elevator 17 miles above headed navigation on a privately dredged channel that they maintained. And we had a boat, the William Kimball, that ran back and forth up there. So we were kind of limited as the number of boats that we had. So if we were doing all the shifting and spotting that they wanted us to do, it was hard to break and make tow. So we located a boat in St. Louis, and we put together a business plan and gave it to Mr. Eipel about bringing that boat up to make and break tow in the St. Paul Harbor. And basically he said, no, it wasn't a good idea.
Okay.
So the 3 of us that had done that, we got together and we decided, well, we would buy the boat and we would put it to work. And they wanted to get the work lined up before we went ahead and bought it. So,
if I may, what did a boat go for back then?
25,000 Single screw, Fairbanks Morris, opposed piston, 640 horsepower. Somebody said it looked like a sea monster had crawled up through our stern tubes and died in the engine room.
Right.
Anyway, so they did that. So I went and talked to Central Sawyer about working at Red Wing when the navigation season began. And we also talked with a group at Grundy County Marine about our boat working up there during the winter. So this is the beginning of the winter of 1972. So those 2 guys resigned from, 2 partners resigned from, they were both licensed. Well, you didn't have to be licensed in those days, but they had both been towboat operators for quite a while.
Gotcha.
They resigned and we put the boat working for Archer Daniels Midland, Artco, and because they were the last company to leave, they had the last 2 tows out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and when they would get into the locks, the ice was jamming up on them. So we would wash the locks out
Okay.
for them to bring the tows in, and so we got a job with them going all the way down to Alton, and it was a month and a half to get down there.
Sure.
Or more, probably more. So I stayed though to complete the billing, and because the navigation season had ended, but we still had billing that we had to get out. And chase everything down, make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed and all of that. So I stayed on and did that. And then I resigned from the company. And so I went to, I rode on the boat, and I had a typewriter, and I would, and a checkbook, and I would get the logs and type out the billing information, because when we sent the bill to Artco, we had to tell them whose barges we touched and all this, so because they were rebilling stuff also. So every day I would type up all of this stuff, and then would mail it when we got the next lock, and
Okay.
And it would go on out, and then I had the checkbook, and we had to do our PACE process so that we were near a bank where we could put the withholding for Social Security and federal income tax into the bank, because you had so many working days to do it after you had written the checks.
Okay.
And we had to do all of that. So I was kind of keeping up with that stuff. And then I was decking also. We were very concerned about having just one deckhand on the weather deck at night. So as much as possible, whenever a deckhand had to go out on the weather deck at night, we would wake another deckhand up to send out with them. We were limited. So there were basically 3 deckhands and 2 pilots, and I was the 3rd deckhand, and I was also the clerk.
Right.
And those Fairbanks Morris, those OPs, they're like those wood burning, those oil burning cars I was talking about earlier. That thing went through a lot of lube oil.
Yeah.
We had 55-gallon drums of lube oil up on the deck, and of course, at those cold temperatures, the stuff was like molasses. You'd pour it out, and you'd have to cut it with a board, a shingle.
Right.
Cut it like that, so it would, and then it would flop down. You have to wait till it oozed out, and then you'd bring it to the engine room, and you had to leave in the engine room for about 20 or 30 minutes before you could pour it into the engine, because otherwise it was just too thick.
Right.
So we had to keep all our soft lines in the engine room. When they weren't in use on a coupling, they were in the engine room. So otherwise they would freeze and you couldn't use them.
Right.
Anyways, I had worked on a deckhand as a deckhand before, but never, and I'd gone through industrial lock in New Orleans, but I had never gone through a series of locks like I did on the up in St. Paul, because we would go through a lock and we would only have one deckhand during the daytime, and they would require 2 deckhands for locking. So I would leave the office and drive to the lock, get on, be the 2nd deckhand, and as they were leaving the lock, I'd get back in my car and drive back to the office.
Yeah.
But so it was a big learning experience. But we got down through all of that, and then when we got over there to Grand County Marine, the people that owned that place, I forgot their names now, they mentioned an area that didn't have service, tug service.
Okay.
And the other 2 guys wanted to stay down there even through the summer. And I had made this agreement with, and they too made this agreement with Central Soya, and they said, no, we're not going to go back up there. Ultimately they did, which is it's interesting. But and I said, I think you're missing out on a big opportunity here, and I don't want to be dealing with this because I don't think it's right. Y'all buy me out.
Okay.
And they did. And I said, just what I've got in it, and I'm gone. So I called up, ACBL had been asking me earlier if I would consider working for them back in the Gulf. So I called them and I said, if that's still open, I'm interested. And they said, we can you catch a flight tomorrow and come down here? We'll have a ticket waiting for you. So I flew down to Jeffersonville and talked with them, and they hired me. And I went back up, put my wife on a plane, sent her back down to the Gulf, and then I drove down to Jeffersonville and went through my orientation and all of that, and drove down and started working in the Gulf for ACBL.
What was your role there?
Originally, I was training under Al Redo to handle all the shifts in the New Orleans harbor, particularly the loading of steel and things like that, because we would have often 2 or 3 ships that we would put into one barge, and you had to kind of coordinate all of that. And because of the less than barge load lots, shifting would have to be done often while the longshoremen were there working. So they had to be done very timely. Otherwise, you'd have a big delay on the labor force, and that didn't make the customers very happy.
How many boats and fleets did ACBL operate at that point down here?
At that point, they operated the West Wego fleet.
Dockside?
And no, they had West Wego fleet. They had Harahan fleet.
Okay.
Those were the only 2 fleets that they had. They used.
Where was West Wego fleet?
It was where the grain elevator is, going
So
down below.
it's cargo. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and we used Domino towing, doing most of those ship side shifting and things like that. So anyway, then they wanted me to work in the canal, but they had signed these contracts with the salt companies where they would guarantee the salt companies a certain number of barges per week. And with prior notice, the salt companies could demand more or could say, no, we don't need that many more.
Okay.
Or if we weren't able to make the commitment for that week, we had to give them advance notice. And it was a series of debits and credits. Nobody wanted to pay courage and all this. So you would keep so keeping up with those contracts, because that was with Weeks, Cote Blanche, Avery, and Jefferson Island, JI.
Mm-hmm.
So, because Belle Isle had just closed. When I got down to the Gulf Coast, that was that last mine collapse at Belle Isle.
Right.
And Cargill closed that.
Right.
And so anyway, so we had these 5 salt companies and these 5 salt contracts. So they put me on bulk liquids to be backup for Tony Labruzzo, who handled all the bulk liquids, because the vast majority of the bulk liquid movements were done on the canal. And since I was dealing with the canal boats, put me in that. And that's how I broke into dealing with bulk liquids. So
if I may backtrack a little bit, how many barges per week were all these mines requesting?
I think when the season was going pretty good, you could wind up with 35. So I want to say that the salt company, but sometimes it would be more than that, because we would be trying to catch up. If we were in a hole and owed them barges and barge days, we would try to stick more in there. So I think that the way the thing was, as I recall, so they could they could say to us, no, we had to say, we will provide you with 7 barges a week, every week. But you can say, give us 3-week advance notice and say, I'm only taking 3 barges that week, and I'm taking 7. I'll catch up over time. So if you had all 5 mines working and you were delivering 7 barges a week to all 5 mines, that'd be 35 barges.
Okay.
So, but sometimes it was a little more than that. Sometimes it was a little less. It was interesting. I got to go into all the salt mines. I went down there and toured them all and all of that kind of stuff. but I was also working with Tony Labruzzo, and the salt mine contract administration was not that difficult on the weekends. You do every other weekend. The tank barge activity never stopped. It was always pretty heavy. These are 10,000 barrel tank barges we're talking about, the old Kim barges. And so you had to be on top of your game. So when Tony was off, I would be responsible for all the tankers. So he would start telling me Friday morning what was going on for the weekend and all of that. And so I got to know a few people in the business and got to know characteristics of some of the bulk liquids and all this kind of stuff. And my family was getting bigger. And Jenny, we already had a son, and Jenny was expecting again. And Shotan Transportation had an opening. They wanted a sales guy. So I applied for the job.
Okay.
And so they also had 75 grain barges at that time. They'd been bought by Ohio River Company, and the barges were slowly going over to the Ohio River Company. But until it went all the way over, I was supposed to book the grain barges too. So I had experience on the grain side, and then backing up Tony Labruzzo, I'd got experience on the bulk liquid side.
Right.
So they hired me, and that meant I didn't have to do weekend work theoretically, which meant I could be available to help my wife with the newborn daughter that we had coming along and my young son.
Yes, sir.
So I went to work for Shotan, and I was their sales guy. We finally got rid of the grain barges. I did sales work on all the tank barge fleet, and they wanted to look at getting heavy into the 6-oil. They weren't sure they wanted to do that or not. So they gave me a job of doing marketing research and development on 6-oil. So I took about 4 or 5 months and did all of that. At the end of that time, they decided that they were already in the 6-oil business, but they decided they wanted to stay on the clean side.
Okay.
So Scott Shotan had sold Shotan to the Ohio River Company 5 years previously, and he had a no-compete clause with them. And he was building marine equipment, and they had Shotan, Ohio River Company, had the first right to use the equipment. And when they didn't want a piece of equipment, Scott Shotan Jr. and Lynn Sherrill had formed a company called Canal River Towing. And they called me and asked me to come on board as sales guy because they were going to be operating a lot more bulk liquid equipment.
Okay.
I didn't know the timing on this, but so I came on board to them as vice president of sales, and 2 months later, Scott's 5-year non-compete was up. He bought Canal River Towing from assets out from under the company, renamed the operating company Scott Shotan Inc., and we were off and running.
Okay. Good for him.
So, yeah. So anyway, all that got done. So fast forward a year, 18 months, something like that. I had been negotiating a deal with Dow Chemical to put most of our equipment to work for Dow Chemical on a very long-term contract.
Okay.
And Captain Scott had gone on a trip around the world, and he and Pat, Miss Pets, went on QE2, and while they were gone, Lynn Sherrill and James Jonfro, and I guess Scotty was involved in it too, I don't know. They made a deal with a brokerage company called Alliance Marine, which was Levees and Dick Keenitz and some other guy, that they would be doing. Scott Shotan Inc. had a methanol tow working for DuPont through this brokerage group,
Okay.
Joe Shotan. And that contract was about up. Well, this group, Alliance Marine Group, basically convinced Lynn and John Fro and Scotty that they could keep all the equipment busy and they would take care of everything for a slight percentage. I don't know what it was. Might have been 2.5%. It might have been less than that. But anyway, but they said, well, you know, Frank's still our sales guy. And they said, well, here's our list of customers. And y'all can't, if we do this agreement, y'all can't compete with these guys. You can't solicit business from these guys, but he could work with anybody else. Well, hell, it was just about everybody in the industry. So they showed that to me, and I said, no, that's not right. I said, I've almost got this deal done with Dow, and Dow was on there. We don't need to pay these people any money. And Lynn said, well, that's the way it's going to be. And I said, well, you know, you don't need me anymore. And they said, well, if we don't need you, then we don't need you. And I said, well, all right, fine. You know, not a problem.
Yep.
He said, well, you know, you came on to work here under this. We don't want to leave you. You leave with a bad taste. And, you know, it's a decision we made and all that. So we will pay you for the coming year and keep you on the medical, which was great because my wife was 8 months pregnant at the time and with my youngest, Timothy. And keep you on the medical. We'll do that for up to a year. But when you find a job, you let us know. And we're going to, when you get picked up by the other coverage medical plan and all that, we're going to cut everything off. And
Right.
I said, okay, that's fair. That's, I don't have a problem with that at all. Good enough. So I left and I got offered a bunch of jobs. Most of them involved moving though, and didn't want to move. And Harvey Lumiere and Fritz Windhorst had started a company that they wanted to do towing brokerage and vessel brokerage and stuff like that called Harwin. And they asked me to come over and start the company from the ground up and build it up and all of that. And I said, okay, that's what I'll do, because that allowed me to stay where I was.
And how many boats did you have starting that up?
None.
0 boats. Okay.
Zero boats. It was just me.
All right.
And so I talked to some people, and I got some people to say, yeah, we'll work a boat through you and all this. And I finally built up a staff and got an accountant, anyway, it was 3 of us brokering boats and barges and freight. And Lumiere's company, Harvey Industries, was in bankruptcy, and he was trying to come out of bankruptcy, and he had a plan they'd submitted to their board of creditors. And one of the creditors, I'm not sure who it was, said that they thought that they were sheltering money under this Harwin thing they had heard about. Lumiere was involved in. So one of the ways they would agree to this thing was if Lumiere divested himself of, he and Windhorst divested themselves of their interest in Harwin. So they came to me and said, you know, we're going to shut this thing down or you can buy it. I said, well, what do you want to sell it for? He said, we don't want any money at all. We'll give it to you. But we borrowed some money from this bank to start it, $20,000.
Okay.
And that was our seed money. And they said, you know, you're the ones that got all this thing going. It's a going concern now. You can pay this off from cash flow, but you know, it's your decision on what to do with all of this.
Now, what year is this? What year is this?
This is Christmas of '78.
Okay.
So they wanted to take it out by the end of the year. So I went to my wife had a cousin who we were very close to. She was a retired school teacher, and anyway, she was relatively well off. So I borrowed $20,000 from her for 60 days because I knew by then my receivables would have come in, I could pay her off, which I did.
Sure.
Gave me the money, so right there at the new year, I bought the company.
Okay.
And then I ran the company. We built a bunch of barges. We had some barge partnerships that we were running. We had a barge fleet, cleaning and repair service. And
Where was
anyway,
it?
pardon?
Where was the your fleet and repair?
The fleet and repair was commercial fleet. It was what's now the lower end of Artco's fleet there, between American Cyanamid, which is called something else now, I forgot.
Is this
Cyan-
Artco Sarah or Canizero? 110 or
this,
120?
this is the old 2-lane fleet. This is all
Okay.
about
Okay.
118, 119.
I want to
Now
say
it's-
one. I want to say 114, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, I think 114 is that lower end of the
Or is
ambulance.
that's Flowers? 114 is Flowers. Anyway,
It was ours, but they don't even have a fleet over there anymore, do they?
there's some activity at 114 now. I think it's at a truck dock.
Pardon?
I think it's at a truck dock.
Oh, now that may be on the east bank, but this fleet was on the west bank.
Okay.
American Cyanamid, we service their dock and all that stuff. Anyway, to make a long story short, I had three partners in that, and we sold the company off and split it up, and different people took different parts and everything. And then I started a company called Mohawk Services, and I was doing owner's rep work and surveying and a little bit of marine brokerage and stuff like that. And I did that. That company still exists, it's just dormant. But I quit operating it in 1991 because I'd started Turn Services in 1990.
Okay.
And it was beginning to take all my time.
Sure.
And
did you start that by yourself, or were there partners for Turn Services?
So I had originally there was just two of us, George Faust and I. And then George had to get out, so I had a friend named Jim Johnston, and Jim came in and bought George out, and Jim stayed with me until I sold the company to Associated Terminals, or David and Gary, the owners of Associated Terminals. And by that time, we picked up a third partner, Jim Harrington, who was a friend of mine. And Jimmy had purchased some deck barges, and he had been chartering them out. And the charter hire was up, and basically we took those barges over and built our cleaning plants on those deck barges.
Okay. And
that was his equity contribution to the company, and so he got some portion of the company from that. So anyway, we started up at Burnside with Ormet Corporation. We ran their fleets and did cleaning and repair up there. And then we were up at Cooper-Darrow also. And then we started the Sonny Ivy from ACBL called me. And I had worked with Sonny when I was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and when I was with ACBL. And we got along really good. He called me and he said, we bought SC&O Barge Line. I said, yeah, I'd heard about that. He said, well, they have a cleaning plant at Lewing. We have a cleaning plant at Harahan. And I want to do some of that cleaning and repair plant up there. So I'm asking people to come and take a look at this stuff and give us some suggestions on what we should do with this, or what they would be willing to do with this on our behalf. So I said, okay, fine. So I think there was 7 or 8 of us that went up there at different times, looked at all the equipment and everything, and only 2 people made proposals. And I don't even know who the other company was. But I proposed, I found some land, so go back a couple of months. Memco Barge Line George Fouts had worked with Mimco Barge Line, and he wanted to clean barges down there, but they didn't have a water discharge permit for cleaning barges. So I got one for Devant, and I would go down and clean barges with a 3-inch pump and 4 or 5 and open hoppers, and we'd clean them out of the coal, and then they would load some kind of ore or something in them northbound. And it was a very big advantage for the barge lines. They didn't have to bring an empty back up from there. They got a northbound load. The terminal generated additional income. So it was pretty good for everybody. And I saw that business growing. So I went to Sonny and I said, this is what I want to do. I'd like to take it down there and get a cleaning and repair plant. And he said, okay, go out. And I was using Electricals and IMT's fleets at that time. He said, go and find some land. So I went down there. I found this land on the East Bank above Electrical. And I went and talked with this lady. And my deal was that I was getting all my permits, my fleeting permits and all of that stuff. And I wouldn't start paying lease on the property until I got the permits in hand. Well, her lawyer, he had gotten burned on a deal like this years before, and he said, no, if you don't have your permits by this particular date, it doesn't make a difference. You got to start paying. So I went to Sonny and I said, this is what happened. I don't have the money to carry this thing and all of that. He said, well, all right, let me talk. So anyway, he went and talked to Bob Zane and Hagan and Whitlock, came back and he said, we're going to sign the lease with this lady and we'll sign a mirror lease with you. And we're going to ask her to give us last look on the property to buy it. And we will give you last look on the property to buy it if we go to sell it.
And this is mile 56.
Yep.
Okay.
So I said, great. I figured out how to I had gotten a way to pay for the finance the cleaning and repair dock. But I told Sonny, I said, I got to put the moorings in and I don't have anything for this. He said, look, we're going to finance the whole damn thing.
Nice of him.
Really? He said, yes. So we're going to finance the SCNO 1602 and the other 3 spar barges. We're going to put in a spar barge fleet. And we're going to build you a ramp. And you're going to have to pay us off in 7 years at this much interest rate. I said, okay. So we did.
Sure.
And it worked. And so in the meantime, ACBL buys Valley Line. And Valley Line had bought Flowers. And they got that coal contract. They had that coal contract going over to I want to say Electric Fuels, but that's not it. It's Crystal River. Yeah, Crystal River, Florida Power and Light.
Okay.
And so Markowitz comes over to ACBL, and Markowitz, me, and Hagan are having dinner one night in New Orleans, and they're telling me what they need me to do. Yeah, Markowitz, who had come over from Valley Line, and Hagan. And I think Finley might have even been there. I had met David Finley when we were working up at Ormet at Burnside. He and Dan Barker had the Associated Terminals thing up there at that point in time. And I had gotten to be friends with David back then. I think David might have been there too. Anyway, the the fall before the harvest was disappointing. I forgot what year this is. Probably sometime in the 90s.
Okay.
Anyway, the harvesting had been disappointed, and ACBL had a huge northbound book. And it didn't look like they were going to have, and it was covers. It didn't look like they were going to have the covers in the Gulf to cover this thing. So Markowitz has this scheme. He's going to take all the covers, all of the coal that's going to Florida Power and Light, and he's going to put it in stack covered barges and send it to IMT to have them unloaded. But IMT is charging him like $1,500 for every barge that has stack covers.
Okay.
And they ask him about spreading them, and they want like $3,000 to have the covers, then to spread them again, and all this. Anyway, so Markowitz says, you need a crane. You need to be able to spread covers. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring all the barges into Turn Services fleet. So I take an option on the rest of the 2,800 feet that Alma Peterson owned, and Sonny and them come in and install this fleet, put more spar barges on. I got more debt now with ACBL. I need to finance the thing, but I've been paying some stuff down. And I don't have a crane. So I run into Charlie Metcalf, and I said, Charlie, you were refitting some crane? He said, yeah, I got this crane from the Army Corps of Engineers, just power up and power down. I said, oh, it's not breaking. He said, oh, no, she works pretty fast. I said, I'm impressed with it. I just don't have anything for it to do. So I told him what Markowitz was trying to do. And he said, well, let me give this to Keith. This will be a great project for Keith to break his teeth in. So they bring the barges down there, and Metcalf gets the derrick down there, and we tell Keith how many barges are out there. And we didn't have any boats at this time. We're still not operating any boats. We're buying power in from IMT and from Electrical as we need it. They had given us discounts because they used us for other services and things.
Right.
So, so I'd call Keith and say, we got this many barges, and Keith would show up with a crew, and they would take the covers off the barges. And we had these barges that were part of the old paint shop of SCNO. They would store the covers there, take the barges across the way. They'd clean them out in no time. We'd bring them back. They'd put the covers back on, and we'd wash them. They'd send them up, load out of the New Orleans harbor or up above to go north. So we did this. And before I made the deal with Metcalf, Markowitz, that same dinner, he says, whether or not ACBL makes any money this year may depend on whether or not Frank Morton has a crane to handle covers in Myrtle Grove.
Okay.
Said, really? He said, yeah. Well, Bob Zane at this point in time was no longer the guy at ACBL. It was Hagan. And because of the way things happened, that coming fall, ACBL, because of all this industrial stuff, alumina and all this, they were sending up the Ohio River from these barges that had been coal barges with stacked covers we had taken off, and then respread the covers, and then cleaned the barges. And they loaded alumina, and they went north. They wound up with the bulk of their covered fleet on the Ohio River when harvest was supposed to start. But again, the harvest on the upper didn't come through. It was a bumper crop off the Ohio.
Yes, sir.
ACBL made like $100 million in one quarter.
Well, good for them.
Yeah, it was a record. I forgot exactly. Somebody can tell you exactly what the numbers were. I don't remember. But Hagan was honest about the whole thing. I said, Mike, man, I can't believe what happened. He said, John Snow called me. He said, Mike, you did a hell of a job. And he said, John, I got lucky.
Yeah.
I just got lucky. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'm not going to take credit for that. I just got lucky. and they did. So I told Markowitz when I saw him coming February, Mississippi Valley Trade and Transport Conference, I said, where's my portion of all the money y'all made last year? You told me it was depending on me whether or not I spread those covers. And he laughed and said, you got paid.
Yep. Ain't that something?
Yep. But I had a deal with Charlie. So we decided how much we were going to, we'd made a deal with HCBL on how much money they were willing to pay us to take those covers off and then respread them. And then we got a exact number from IMT and Electrico on setting the barge in position and taking it off. So we knew exactly what our costs were. And then we just did a cost share. He got, I think, 85% of the coverage fee. I got 15% for doing the dispatch work and all that, but I got the cleaning and the repair, and I was happy as could be. So I'm still doing this stuff with IMT and Electrico, and IMT decides they're going to put a cleaning plan in, and I'm competition, so they don't want to do any more business with me. And so Electrico's helping me out. They're working all this stuff. So I get this telephone call from Chris Brinkup, and he says, need to have lunch at Copeland's in Elmwood tomorrow, be there at 11:30. I said, okay, fine. So I get in my car, I drive in, get to the table, and there's Whitlock, Bill Kinsler, and Brinkup. And Brinkup says, I said, what's up? All these guys, you got the heavy artillery out here. He said, Morton, it is the dream of every fleet operator not to have to own and crew boats. You've been living the dream. The dream is over. You must buy a boat. I said, hey guys, I ain't got any money. He says, Whitlock says, don't worry. We have a boat, we'll finance.
Yep.
I said, oh, holy cow. So it takes a while to get all this stuff worked out. We get it all worked out, all of that. And lo and behold, there's been the area where the boat was being held, there's been a voltage leak. There's a live wire that's been in the water.
All right.
And eating the hell out of the bottom of that damn boat.
Okay.
So we got to pull the boat out. We got to, replace the bottom plate, and go through the fuel tanks and potable water and all this kind of stuff. And the engines are dead. So ACBL lowers the asking price on it. And I went to Caterpillar and said, look, if I buy engines from you guys, will y'all finance the boat for me? And they said, yeah, we will. So I went to my bank, Whitney, and I said, can I get a construction loan? I got a takeout on the backside of it. And they said, okay, fine. So that's what we did. So Jim Harrington decided he was going to come on board and he was going to go through that boat. Well, let me tell you, you take a towboat apart, put it back together, you learn all about towboats. Jimmy Harrington, expert in about 3 months, because he was drinking from the fire hose and doing it 24 hours a day. And we took that boat apart and put it back together. And that was the Valley Sunrise, now the Sir Barton.
Okay.
And
what did a boat cost at this point?
Oh, I don't even remember. Oh, a lot more than
Right.
A lot more than that single screw Fairbanks Morris OP did. I'm going to say, it's got new engines, it's got new gensets, got a brand new hull. Marvin Dorr came over there and helped us out a little bit on some advice on some things to put in and how to save money and how to save yourself time on maintenance later on. And I think it was pushing 400.
Okay.
But I don't think it was there. But anyway, so we we wound up with that. And I'm just not getting traction. You know, I've got more assets, but lost a little business to IMT because they started barge cleaning and repair over there. Was hoping to get a little more traction with electrical being more aggressive and going after tonnage, but they weren't doing it. They started a midstream thing. They put buoys in. They got a deal with Associated Terminals, and they came down there and did some transfers at that buoy. And then, I don't know, the electrical decided they were going to go ahead and keep going to shore and back from shore. So I'm thinking about ways to increase my revenue, increase my business levels and all this. And ACBL is kind of trying to do the same thing. And I went to Norb and I said, look, Norb, I'm looking down there at what's going on. We got electrical, you got IMT, and you got turn services. And they both want turn services, but they don't want to pay for it.
Okay.
They want to squeeze me out. They can't now because they can't choke me on the boat power because I got the Valley Sunrise. And I'm thinking to myself, what do they have that I don't have? Why they load and unload ships? I don't have any land, but I've got a place to put midstream buoys.
Right.
I understand about $750,000 to do one of these things. And Norb said, that's about right. I said, I had already approached Finley because Finley had been down there with Associated Terminals, but
right.
I had to be very gingerly about this thing because couldn't be ACBL, the way they had treated me and everything, it was my obligation to be straight up with them on anything that was going on. And I'm trying to feel my way around. So I'm sitting there in Norb's office and I said, you know, I can't afford buoys, but even if I did, I don't have a derrick. Whitlock leans over and says, Morton, you need to call David Finley.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you know, we've had a conversation or two. And he said, you need to talk to David Finley. That's what you need to do. I said, okay, fine. So David and Gary and I met at a coffee shop in Ponchatoula, Louisiana, I guess every other week for a couple of months, and kind of ironed and figured out how we were going to do this thing and what the method was going forward and all of this stuff. And, you know, and the only other person that knew anything about it was Whitlock. I just kind of say, you know, we're talking and looks like good, great. And finally we came together with something and they said, well, you know, we'll merge the companies. And I said, no. I said, Jim Johnston, my friend, really wants out. And my friend Jim Harrington, he would like to get out too. There's other things he would like to do. He'll stay on for a while to help with the operation side. He's got some other things that he wants to do. And, you know, so that's me, and I'd be a very small minority owner. And you guys are both a lot younger than I am. I mean, David's 17 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And Gary's younger than David. I said, about the time you guys are in your stride, I'm going to be walking out the door. And, you know, I'd be an impediment to you guys. So why don't I'll stay on, you know, we'll meet a settled agreement, y'all pay the money, and I'll take mine out over time. And then I'll stay and run the company. And they said, okay, we want to sign a 3-year agreement and a non-compete after that for 3 years. I said, okay, I don't have a problem with that. But the other two, they're not going to sign any non-competes or anything like that. So we made a deal. And so I stayed that. And so right after we sold the company, I turned to David Gary and I said, so what do you give me orders on what you want me to do and where do we go from here and what direction we headed in? David says, run it like you own it. Gary said, yep. I said, okay, fine. So I was doing that, and then about 3 years down the line, um, Gary says, well, you want to sign another contract? I said, no, not really. I said, you know, as long as I enjoy what I'm doing, I want to continue to do it. And if you don't like the way I'm doing it, you just quit paying me. You quit paying me, I'm not going to work.
Right.
They laughed and said, okay, fine. I mean, that's all we ever had. I mean, we had a great working relationship. They're two guys good to work with, very good to work with.
Good for
And
you.
yeah, it worked out well. I mean, they're both straight shooters. They're on the up and up. They're good guys.
Sure.
So anyway, that's I guess that's where we got to Turn Services and where Turn Services is now. And then the synergies work between the companies. They put the buoys in down there, brought the crane down there. We wound up getting the floating grain elevator down there. They got the deal at Miro Fleet. We found the property on the West Bank. They got the midstream berths in there. And it just, you know, the working relationship has done very well, and there's good communications, and they work really good as a team. The people on the rigs, the derricks at Associated know all of the fleet people, and they know, you know, they're friends, and they've been around, and they communicate very well with one another. And you know, when they have a problem, they work it out.
Right.
They look out after each other, and that's a big thing. So it's been one of those very fortuitous things. Everybody kept their job, and it expanded. I mean, Turn Services is a workforce of over 400 people, and you know, I'm proud of that as I am of anything. I mean, there's
Right.
4 people with good paying jobs, and they take care of their families and all of that. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a hell of a legacy.
I would say so. I think that's why I reached out to you for this conversation. So what are you doing with yourselves these days?
Well, so I'm still on the board of directors of Turn Services, which doesn't require a lot. I mean, the management team they've got over there between Mario and Todd and Kevin and Gary. I mean, they do very well. So I'm also on the board of directors of America's Watershed Initiative. I had done some fundraising for them earlier.
Tell me what their mission is.
So they take a holistic approach to the watershed of the Mississippi River. So that America's Great Watershed, and they try to approach it so that there's a holistic approach that respects the need for abundant clean water, the environment, recreation, navigation, flood control, agriculture, and they're looking at adding other aspects to it. But it's so that you don't get a solution to a problem that creates problems elsewhere. That when you get a solution to a problem, there's enough consideration given to all the different aspects and their relative values at this particular time that you solve more than one problem, or you solve one problem, but you contribute something to solving other problems.
Right.
So it's got a very diverse group of people who are very, very smart and very intelligent, very collaborative. They really believe in working with one another, and yeah, I think it's a good thing. But it's a big, so hard to get your arms around, because like the Mississippi River Cities and Town Initiative is just about the main stem. But you know, we're about the Ohio and the Tennessee and the Missouri, right. And not only that, the tributaries to those things. I mean, we're technically the watershed. I mean, you're getting down to the, you know, the little itty bitty stuff. And the problem is, if you solve the issues of the main stem, you haven't solved the problems in the tributaries. They're just going to come back. You got to go back and get it all done. And you talk about nutrient load or sediment load or something like that. Well, where does it start?
Right.
It starts with little bitty streams and creeks and goes on down from there. So it's an approach to try to get everybody to come together to work for the betterment of the people of the watershed itself. I mean, there's nothing like it on the planet.
Yeah.
And there are a lot. I heard a statistic that 50 of the 65 poorest counties in the United States are on the Mississippi River. I don't know if it's true or not.
Right.
But I mean, if you start thinking about parts of Northeast Louisiana and Northwest and West Mississippi and Arkansas and the Boot Hill area, and I mean, yeah, there's, I don't know if there's 50, but there's some tough places.
Sure.
Tough places, and people live there, and they need clean water. They need access to good, clean water is the basis of health.
Sure.
If you don't have clean water, you're not going to have health. If you're not going to have good health, how do you expect somebody to get educated? How do you expect them to have the time and the energy to have the effort to improve themselves? I mean, it's about as basic as you can get.
Right.
So, but I'm still active with St. Joseph Abbey and St. Joseph Seminary College, and just a little bit of this, that, and the other. And
sure.
I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but Seaman's Church Institute decided to name me the River Legend this year.
The River Legend. Okay.
The 8th of December at Paducah, the River Bell. The River Bell is going to be awarded to Jim Guidry. And I'm going to get the River Legend Award. And it's, Jim Guidry. And that's a legend. There you go. I mean, he's been all over the place for a long, long time. Great operations guy. He ran Rediff for a while. He's done everything with Gulf Intercoastal Canal. He's done a lot. And he's senior vice president of operations at Kirby. And what a guy. So I don't know how I got thrown into that mix, but every now and then a blind hog finds an acorn, they say. So,
well, congratulations to that blind hog, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. I do appreciate everything you have done, and I appreciate your time today.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim.
We'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot. You too.
Sure.